Hey, say it slowly.
Okay.
Because they want to hear you.
Okay. Check. Welcome and good morning, or excuse me, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donovan Treyon, and first and foremost, I would like to thank all of the service members and veterans for their dedication and sacrifice to this country. I am a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and I have the honor of working in the Office of Veterans Affairs Department located in the Multicultural Affairs Center. My colleagues and I are passionate about helping veterans make a strong transition from military service to the college life. It is an honor to host our first event known as From Boots to Books today and bring together our campus and college community to celebrate Veterans Day and support our student veterans. It is my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Bob Schneider, Dean of the College of Business. Before, Dr. Bob Schneider dedicated his career to helping students and student veterans find purpose and dedication or direction beyond the uniform. He honorably served the U.S. Army for 20 years. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Bob Schneider.
All right, well, you stole half of my speech. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for coming. Thanks for rekindling student vet affairs. All right. Thank you all, faculty, students, ex-presidents, and vice presidents and deans and everybody else that's here, but most of all, veterans. Please raise your hand if you're a veteran. All right. I know y'all want to punch me in the head for that. Sometimes we like to be anonymous. But I'm amazed about once every 3 or 4 months, I run into another person who's worked here as long as I have, which is 10 years, that I didn't know was a veteran. You know, there's a guy that I've been working with for 10 years, and about two months ago, he told me, do you know that I was in the Army and the Marine Corps? Well, it's like, you're double stupid, right? But he went from the Army to the Marine Corps. Anybody in here ever known anybody that went from the Army to the Marine Corps? I know a lot of people went from the Marine Corps to other services, but never from another service to the Marine Corps. All right. Anyway, I didn't think anybody else I'd never seen that in my 62 years on this earth. So he's an interesting guy. Anyway, let me start with something important. Romans 13:4 states that government is God's servant for your good, acting as an avenger who brings wrath on the one who does wrong. Those of us that raised our hand were trained to do a job, to do a mission. All right, and the pretty way to say it is to defend our country and all that kind of stuff, right? But the reality was we got trained and paid to kill people and break their stuff. And sometimes we forget as a country what war is about, what war is. It's never pretty. It's never glorious. It's never, it's not like a birthday party. And for those in this room that whether they actually went to war or not, doesn't matter. They raised their hand and said, I am willing to do these things. Some of them there's still people on active duty in this room, or reserves and guard. All right, so we should never forget that. It's great to pat people on the back, thank you for their service, but it almost becomes automatic and you're not even thinking about it anymore. I do the same thing. Not everybody, I had a wonderful experience in my 20 years. I saw some things that most people shouldn't have to see, and I did some things most people shouldn't have to do. But generally speaking, I don't think about those things. I think about the great times I had over the 20 years. And I think that's what the majority of people do. But that's not the experience of everybody. There's 20 service members every day, 20 vets every day that kill themselves. That's the average. All right, so what are we supposed to do? Well, I don't know. Let's talk about that. All right. So let me start. My name's Bob Schneider. I grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Anybody been to Sheboygan? Yeah, my family. Well, in 1952 or 53, I can't remember, it was voted by Playboy magazine as Sin City, USA. That's our claim to fame. There's a bar on every corner, you know, that kind of, it's Wisconsin. What do you expect? So that was my upbringing. And at 18, I left, went in the Army, and never came back. Never went back. All right. I went to basic training in 1982. I retired and went in as a private E1. I retired 20 years and 14 days later as a first sergeant in the Army. And I'll talk about some of the things I did in between. But the point of this, and let me give you the punchline, and then we'll go back and take the steps. The point of this was, while I was in the military, I was preparing to be out of the military. The people that struggle the most are people that have jobs in the military that don't allow them to do that. All right, you know, so recon Marines don't have a lot of time to go to college at night. You know, neither do Army Rangers or Air Force Special Ops or Navy SEALs. You know, those guys and gals now don't have the kind of time that I did as a medic, stationed, you know, sometimes nice places, sometimes not so nice places. But when I was in the nice places like Germany, I was going to school. All right, and I dropped out of high school my junior year, had to get into a program so that I could graduate on time as a senior, and left the Army 20 years later with a master's degree and didn't pay for hardly any of that, all right, other than time. So where were all my friends? Were they sitting with me in class? No. Where were they? Y'all know where they were. Where were they? Where were my friends? At the NCO club, of course. Yeah, they were having a good time. All right. I was having a good time too. Anyway, then when I got out, I went and got my PhD. I'll talk about that later too. Where do I want to go next? Right here. All right. So like I said, 1982, I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. In 1982, the inflation rate was 19%. So I want you all to think about that, okay? Those of you complaining about 3% inflation, it was 19%. My parents had a mortgage on their house in 1982, and the interest rate was 21%. That was normal, folks. All right, so before you complain about how bad we have it today. Anyway, that was really the impetus to me going in the Army. There really weren't a lot of employment opportunities. It was right after the Carter years. Things weren't really economically looking up. So I go to basic training, Fort Leonard Wood. Anybody want to know, guess what was going on? Somebody named something that was going on in 1982. My story is boring. So I also, every year that I was in, I'm going to tell you something important that happened that year. 1982 is when the Falkland Island invasion. Anybody remember Falkland Islands? Who was that? I'll give you it was Great Britain who was Great Britain with? Argentina. Who said that? Yeah, you're a teacher. That's why. All right, so that's 1982 basic. Everybody went through basic. You know, that's not a big deal. 1983, I went to AIT in Fort Sam Houston to be a medic, and then also for some mental health training. 1983 was the first retail cell phone. I didn't have one. I didn't have a cell phone for 15 more years, but 1983 supposedly, probably those $3,000 ones that you had to use in your car, plug in a cigarette lighter. Y'all know what a cigarette lighter is? You know, they don't have those anymore either, right? I went to AIT, Fort Sam Houston, Texas, San Antonio, to learn how to be a combat medic. I left there and went to Fort Irwin. Fort Irwin's in California. It's in the Mojave Desert. It's Death Valley. It's really hot, really dry, even worse than here. And the interesting thing about Fort Irwin, anybody been to NTC? Who's been to NTC? Somebody in here has been to NTC. Wow. And one person. All right. Yeah, Evan, you didn't like it, did you? Well, I was there for 18 months. But I was Op 4, what was called Op 4. I don't know what they do now, but back in 1983, we dressed in Soviet Union military uniforms. And I drove a Russian BMP as a medic, those six-wheeled vehicles. It was really a Gamma Goat that they made look like one. But anyway, and it tipped it over several times. But as a 19-year-old medic, I was dressed as a Soviet Union soldier driving a Soviet Union vehicle fighting against American forces in the desert of California. And guess what I drove after that? A motorcycle. They gave me a Honda 175 and said, "You are now the medic for the Scouts." And all I did was ride a motorcycle, chase jackrabbits and coyotes for 6 months. But anyway, that was actually my most fun assignment, even though people like Evan hated it because they came out there for training and they had to like eat scorpions and all that kind of stuff. So that was Fort Irwin. That's when they came out with the first Macintosh PC. Steve Jobs came out with the very first Macintosh, 83. 84, I went to Germany for the first time. All right, and I landed in Landstuhl, Germany, and stayed there for 7 years. Although I did go to Baumholder for a year to work at a school at PLDC, and then I went back and I used to deploy to different places. I was there during Desert Storm. I was there, during Desert Storm. I went back and forth. I don't want to tell war stories. But the most interesting thing about that is when I had a whole 2 buses, coach buses, pull up in the middle of the night filled with reserve nurses. Imagine that. In Germany. They had just been flown there from Utah. And they were going to backfill all the nurses at Landstuhl that went downrange. I'm a E6, think I'm really hot, right? So they all get out of the bus and they're all mad. They've been traveling all day. And the first thing I do is I stand at attention and I yell, "Fall in!" What do? They all started laughing at me. So it's funny because people think about different levels of discipline. Well, you were in the Army. When you told somebody what to do in the Army, they had to do it, right? Is that the way it works? When you tell somebody in the military to do it, they have to do it, right? Well, that's true of every job. There's a consequence if you don't. But I found people in the military like to argue more than civilians, even. I don't know if that's changed. It's still the same. Huh? Yeah. All right. Germany, I had a lot of fun in Germany. 86, Chernobyl. Anybody remember Chernobyl? All right. 86, I took my first college class. Graduated from high school in 82. Got to Germany, got settled, all that kind of stuff, and I took my very first college class. And I remember what it was. It was anatomy and physiology. All right. And I got an 8 because I was a paramedic. It was easy. So I started college in 86. Graduated with my bachelor's degree in 91. So it took me 5 years. I don't know if I should be saying this out loud in here, but I think I had like 44 credit hours from CLEPS and Dante's, and I was pretty good at gaming the system. So I would, I'd go watch a bunch of Hill Street Blues episodes, and then I'd go take the CJ CLEP test, that kind of stuff. So I'm not so sure I'm as smart as it says I am on paper. One of the main things that I remember about Germany, I grew up in Wisconsin now, remember, but I remember getting to Germany in August, and the first thing they told me was, "You're on snow removal detail." I lived in the barracks, so if it snowed overnight, they would wake you up at like 4 a.m. to go out and shovel all the sidewalks, especially in front of the hospital, right? And that's just what you did. And I did that for like 4 years. It snows more in Germany than it does in Wisconsin, for those of you that don't know that. I think it snowed like every other night for that first year. So I definitely remember shoveling snow, and I remember doing guard duty and just absolutely freezing my butt off for guard duty. All right, anybody in here remember sleeping in a shelter half? Anybody sleep in a shelter half? I know some of you old people did. Benito, I know you did. Yeah, you're old too. Yeah, so you used to get a piece of material, canvas material, 3 feet long by 2 feet wide, something like that. It had a bunch of holes in it. See, and I had one and you had one. So if I didn't like you and you didn't like me, it meant that canvas became a blanket and it wasn't a tent because you needed two sides to make a tent. All right, that tent was about this wide and two grown men had to fit in it. We stayed warm. Yeah. So in 1987, the USA started talking to the Soviet Union. Who was that? Reagan and Gorbachev. Remember that? All right. And they had that INF treaty. That was the very first treaty they signed to kind of de-escalate the Cold War. 1987. 1988, USSR withdrew from Afghanistan. Now, how many of you didn't know that in the 80s, the Soviet Union was at war against Afghanistan? There's probably people in our military went to Afghanistan to fight in Afghanistan and didn't know that just 20 years earlier, Soviet Union was fighting the very same people. In fact, that's why the people in Afghanistan, many of them had M16s, because we gave M16s to the Afghanis to fight the Soviets, and they kept them. So then they shot at us with them. All right. It's funny how that works, is the reason I'm bringing that up. It's very funny how that works. You know, today our enemy is tomorrow our ally. All right. Keep that in mind. That's actually a pretty important life lesson. Many of us learn that in military because it's a small military. You move, and oh boy, the one person I didn't want to see at this new assignment, guess who's here? You know, the guy I fought with at the last assignment. So getting along is a good idea. All right, 1989. What's the big thing that happened in 1989? The Berlin Wall went down. Yeah. I was telling earlier, I was in my office, painting my office on a Saturday night. I speak pretty good German, and the German radio announcers were screaming and yelling so much I didn't know if World War III started or what had gone on. And I had to switch over to AFN, and they said, the Berlin Wall just went down. All right, just a normal Saturday night in Germany. And Sunday morning, the Autobahn was filled with Trabants, for those of you that know what those are, the little East German cars that only go about 45 miles an hour on the German Autobahn. Yeah. East-West Germany was reunited in 1990. And then in 91, the end of the Cold War was declared. It's over. What else happened in 91? 1991. Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Okay. So I had the hits keep on coming. So I left Germany in 91. And went to Fort Leavenworth to work in the United States Disciplinary Barracks, otherwise known as the Big House, the prison at Leavenworth. And I always like to tell people when they say, thank you for your service, I say, thank you for telling me that. But I often will also tell people, remember, not everybody who served in the military served honorably. All right. There's prisons full of ex-vets. All right, that got sent there while they were on active duty. So, you know, I'm not saying we should discredit the service, but I'm saying, you know, so don't get taken by a vet. How about that? I've known vets that will use the fact that, in fact, there's a guy sitting here who used to run homeless homes for vets in Clovis. And homelessness is a big problem, but it's mostly a problem because of drugs and alcohol. So you give a drunk a house, he's still going to be a drunk. So just putting people in a house isn't the answer. Anyway, so I get to the United States Disciplinary Barracks and I meet all kinds of murderers and rapists and thieves and all that kind of stuff. And I'm the head medic. I'm there. They didn't have a riot there. Stuff followed me. Floods followed me. Bad stuff followed me. I get there, they hadn't had a riot since like 1967, literally, since the Vietnam War. And I'm there for 4 years, and in the 4 years, they have 3 riots. During those 3 riots, we had 5 or 6 guards get killed, about a dozen inmates, a lot of really serious injuries, a lot of like just busted over the head, blood everywhere kind of stuff. I actually saw more blood in that prison than I did anywhere else as a medic. Prisons are very violent. Anyway, so in 91, LA riots. Anybody remember that? LA riots? All right. The worst thing I remember from that is, anybody remember this, the 18-wheeler and the cinder block? Oof, that was harsh. All right. 1991, I said I got my bachelor's degree. 1994, I got my master's degree. 1993 was the first World Trade Center bombing. It was also Branch Davidian in Waco, for those of you that remember that. So I'm bringing you all this history, number one, because it's kind of cool to remember, but number two, to remind you that, you know, it's funny, you go into Army to project strength around the world, and your country is in chaos. And that's how I always felt when I was in the military. I just felt like, you know, I'm in Germany and I'm walking the border with East Germany, and, you know, they're shooting bullets over my head, and I'm like, man, I can't wait to tell my kids about these stories, you know. And then I read the newspaper and there's riots going on in LA, and I'm like, what is wrong with us? That's my common theme in this speech. I have a poster or a thing in my office, and it says, like your mother used to ask you, what the hell is wrong with you? All right. And I often think that. All right. We do all this good, and we try to do all this good, and then we screw it up. So anyway, 1994, I put down two things. The less funny one is that it was the end of apartheid in South Africa. But the other big thing that year was the OJ trial. Who remembers the OJ trial? All right. Does anybody in here own a white Ford Bronco? So, anybody in here ever been involved in a slow speed chase? Troy, I told a story about you earlier. Yeah, that's our Army Marine. So anyway, 94, end of apartheid, OJ trial. 95 was the Oklahoma City bombing. I was still stationed at Leavenworth, and I already had orders to go back to Germany, I remember. But I remember we were out doing some kind of training, and somebody said the World Trade Center, or I mean, not the World, what was the Murrow building, I think it was called, in Oklahoma City, just got blowed up. Some butthead named Timothy McVeigh, right? Oh, he was a vet too. Gee, look at that. All right. So we need to make sure and keep track of our vet friends. And when one of us doesn't seem right, we need to, you know, smack us in the back of the head and say, hey, what's going on? Because we got some pretty cool training, but that training could be turned into something pretty dangerous too. All right. So we need to always remember that. 94, I went back. 95, I left the disciplinary barracks and I went back to Heidelberg, Germany. Went back to Germany, went to Heidelberg. And that was when the Atlanta Summer Olympic bombing happened. It would be way more difficult for me to find world events that happened during this time. This had a big impression on me, folks. It made me think about not coming back to the States. I seriously considered not coming back to the United States after serving for 20 years. I was like, I really felt pretty bad at the end of my time, or toward the end. Then the next thing in 97, while I was still in Germany, it was August. Anybody know what happened August 97? I was walking in the Swiss Alps in a snowstorm. And because it was just a hike, you know, kind of thing we were doing in the Swiss Alps. Or it was Austrian Alps. And woke up in the morning, staying in a little mountain chalet kind of thing, and go down to breakfast, and the TV's on. Princess Diana was just killed. All right. Then 98, and we get a chuckle. All I got to do is say two names, a first and a last name. Monica Lewinsky. We don't need to explain that. There's children in the room. So anyway, 98, I came back to the States, and I went to drill sergeant school at Fort Benning. and I was a drill sergeant at Fort Benning for a very short amount of time, and then I came out on a promotion list to make E8, and they didn't like the fact that they had a, but it doesn't matter how I got there. And so as soon as I made the E8 list, they're like, nope, you're going back to Fort Sam Houston. You need to be with your medical people. So I came back to Fort Sam Houston, and I worked at Fort Sam until I retired in 2002. But 99 was something that started another bad habit, if I can understate it, the Columbine shooting. But then we had a lighter moment in 2000. And again, I'll just say 2 words, and I don't probably have to explain anything more. Hanging chads. Old people know what I'm talking about. The young people, what the hell is that? What's a hanging chad? It was Gore-Bush, right? Yeah, Gore-Bush election. And in Florida, they had people holding up little punch cards to see if the little thing that you punch through a punch card was actually all the way through or not. And they called those hanging chads. And they had to hand count all the election stuff. So we've had problems in our country with elections for a long time. Don't let the news make you believe that challenging elections is a new thing in our country, because it's not. In fact, don't let the news make you believe anything, because they're all full of crap. If you've ever lived anywhere, you see that, they report on this happening there while you're here. But if you know somebody there, it's never what they say it is. It's everything to fit their agenda. Anyway, 2000, I'm stationed at Fort Sam, and I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I got a master's degree. I know I didn't want to go past 20 years. Why? Because the military is temporary, and it's for young people. All right. Well, I'm not going to go there, but the fat old generals, we needed to get rid of the fat old generals. We need to get rid of a lot of fat old people in the military, because that's not conducive to the military. All right. So I knew that at 38. At 38, I knew this didn't have a long future for me anymore. So I got out and made, at the time, what was probably a really bad choice. I went to work for a company that eventually got bought by Lockheed Martin. I don't want to say the name of the company because it still exists, and some of you may have interactions with them because they deal with VA. And I worked for them, and I completely, for the first couple of years, lost myself as far as ethically. I made more money than I'll ever see again, for sure. But I was working 60-hour weeks. I was traveling a lot, spending a lot of time in El Paso and Atlanta and places like that. And I was having trouble looking at myself in the eye in the mirror. We were doing things and charging and billing the federal government less than what it would have cost them to do it if they didn't contract it. But we were still doing it for way more expensive than we needed to do it. And that drove me absolutely nuts. So I did my 4.5 to 5 years with that company, and figured out that a way easier way of life was higher ed. All right. So, but I also knew that if I wanted to work full time in higher ed, that meant getting a terminal degree. All right. You can do it with a master's degree, but it's not as reliable. You don't make as much money. So I knew I needed to go get a terminal degree, which is another story in itself, because it took me like twice as long as it's supposed to take. Number one, because I didn't take advice and I didn't use existing data. And number two, my dissertation completely fell apart, and that wasn't my fault. But anyway, I got there, I got it. All right. After I worked for Lockheed, then I worked for a vending machine company for a little while. That was a trip. And then I never seen so many thieves in my life. Go into a cash business if you want to find thieves. Because there's no way, people were walking away with whole handfuls of $1 bills that they'd just taken out of a soda machine. Well, how do you know how much was in that soda machine? We didn't keep that kind of record. There's no, you don't barcode an individual can of Coke. So people were stealing a lot of, I guess what I'm trying to say through this is, throughout all the bad things that happen, you need a mission. And I think this is why we're having the trouble with suicides that we're having with military. When I was on active duty, I knew what my mission was that day, every day I got up. Every single day. I knew what the training schedule said that day. And I knew what my day was going to be like. It was going to be outside, it was going to be inside, it was going to be hard, it was going to be physically easy, not easy, whatever. I knew that. Now, when I come to work, I have no idea what kind of day it's going to be. I have no idea. And that's been that way ever since I got out of the military. And anybody else struggle with that? Not being able to know how your day is going to go, not being able to predict, you don't mind a hard day as long as you know it's coming. But when you go to work here on a Friday and you think, oh, it's going to be an easy day, and it's not, it's a little weirder, So that was something I had to get used to. All right. That was my time. I first worked for a place called Park University, which was actually a good transition for me because they're very heavily military. They're on all the Air Force bases except Cannon and a lot of Marine Corps bases. All right. So I worked full time for Park, and they hired a president who had trouble balancing the checkbook. So they ended up doing retrenchment. That's how I got here. Don't ever look at getting laid off or losing a job as a bad thing. Ever, unless it's your fault. Then don't ask. All right, but if it's not your fault, don't look, because there's a next thing. All right, I got laid off in the middle of April, and by the end of May, I already signed a contract to come here. I got laid off with 37 other people. Well, 37 other than me. There were 38 of us total. Do you know what they did? They all went and got a lawyer. The lawyer told them, you cannot find another job. You cannot work at this point. Do not work. And they all did a class action suit, got 2 years pay and all that kind of stuff. All right. See, that was the stuff I was involved with when I worked as a federal contractor that made me not sleep at night. Do the right thing, folks. We learned it in the military. We all know what the right thing is. So people say, thank you for your service. People respect us because we were in the military. The last thing we need to do is give them an example of how not to act so that they can follow us. Well, he's a vet. He's doing it. All right. So I know when you were in the military, you had NCOs telling you or officers telling you, you need to be the example for your junior people. That's true in life. Many of you are here now as students, as vets. Those 18-year-olds look up to you. They really, really do. And when you're complaining about it and you're like, I'm not coming to class tomorrow, this is crap. They're listening. Now, you thinking that is okay. But once you say it and other people are hearing it, that's not okay. So let's be the example. Let's give everybody a next mission. Let's talk about what we're going to do. Let's talk about what we need to do next. Let's talk about what we need in our country. Let's talk about what we need at Eastern. Let's talk about what you need to do tonight, what you need to do this weekend. Hey, did you study for the test yet? Let's get together Saturday night. It's those positive interactions that keep people moving forward that we experienced in the military. It's what doesn't happen in civilian life. Because if you live in the dorm and you go lock yourself in the room on Friday after class and don't come out till Monday morning, nobody cares. Nobody notices. But if you notice, then you should be the person going and knocking on that dorm door and saying, hey, man, what are you doing hanging out in your dorm? Come on, we're at the library studying, or whatever. All right, giving people that next mission, looking forward. I mentioned briefly that I was trained in mental health in the Army. And one of the big things when you're dealing with someone who's, suicidal is if they're talking about, I'm killing myself tonight. And then they go into talking about they can't wait to go to their sister's birthday party next week. All right. So if you can get them talking about something that's going in the future, it gets them off of that immediate problem. And then you can start dealing with that problem. All right. So always talking with that. I always like to talk with, so what are you going to do about that? So what are you doing? When's the next time you're going to do that? When, how's that going? Are you still doing this? Because vets who aren't busy get in trouble, in my experience. We really do. because we're so used to, we were groomed to be very busy. We were always busy. What did our sergeants say when we were private? Private, you ain't got nothing to do? I'll find you something to do, right? All right. I never heard that phrase until I was in the Army. Anyway, here's some, well, let's not. This, anybody know what this is? Is it appropriate to wear this on Veterans Day? It's a Memorial Day thing. Yeah, it's a poppy. All right, but it's also appropriate to wear on Veterans Day. And I've always known that, but I even looked it up to verify it. You can wear Veterans Day or Memorial Day. All right, what's the name of the poem that it came from? In Flanders Field. Man, you're a show off. Teacher's pet. All right. Yep. It was a World War I poem, all right, written by John McCrae in Flanders Fields. And it talked about the poppies that were growing right after a battle in World War I. And the idea that these red poppies were coming up out of the ground in this blood-soaked battlefield is very, kind of symbolic. So that's what this symbolizes. We should all know that. And it's okay to wear it on Veterans Day and it's really appropriate on Memorial Day. So history of Veterans Day, 11 November 1918 was the end of World War I, Armistice Day, right? 1938, 20 years later, same day is when they switched Armistice Day to Veterans Day. All right, so World War II had not happened yet, 1938. Germany had invaded Poland, but World War II with us had not happened yet. 1954, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 1938, it was turned a federal holiday. It wasn't turned into Veterans Day until 1954. Okay, so let me get that right very quickly. When was the Army formed? 14 June 1775. So like 13 months before the country. So we had an Army before a country. We had a Navy before a country, and we had a Marine Corps before a country. All right, Navy was just 3 months later in October. They created the Navy. All right, and 1 month later, them sailors couldn't handle anything without the Marines. They had to create the Marines a month later. So before the country was even established, we had an Army, a Navy, and a Marine Corps. Anybody want to guess why we didn't have an Air Force? Who's the star student? Now, you're not speaking up now. There were no airplanes yet. Okay, so the Coast Guard predates the Air Force. The Coast Guard came around in August 1790. 1790. All right, so they were just, 14 years? Yeah, 14 years after the country was formed. So it didn't take long to come up with a Coast Guard either. Air Force, 18 September 1947, after World War II. So what was the Air Force called in World War II? Because there were definitely planes in World War II. There were planes in World War I. Army Air Corps. I just wanted to make sure y'all knew that. Yes. Wasn't the Marine Corps Air Corps. Wasn't Navy Air Corps. It was the Army Air Corps. And Space Force. Woo. Space Ranger. Well, but they're the Space Force, but they're called Space Rangers. Yeah. I think they should have thought harder about that one. But 20 December 2019. So it's only 6 years old. 6 years old is Space Force. All right. So here's a little quiz. Look to your person to your left or your right and tell them what you say to a veteran on Veterans Day. Anybody say anything other than thank you for your service? Happy Veterans Day. Okay. So, yeah, we don't have very many creative people in here then. Look, if you say thank you for your service, that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't turn it into, how you walk by 10 people and you're like, sup. All right. And it doesn't, you don't really care what's up with that person. All right. So, look them in the eye and actually mean it. Or don't say anything. It's okay if you don't say anything. So where should you honor Veterans Day? Well, you're doing it. Ceremonies, parades, Memorial Day is more the cemetery, but cemeteries are okay too. All right. And why? Well, why? Why should we remember veterans? Most of us don't want anything. We get a lot, we get good house mortgage and we get VA benefits and all that kind of stuff. So, most of us don't go demanding stuff. All right. But we are bothered by the fact that 20 of our brothers and sisters kill themselves every day. So if for no other reason, please reach out to that vet. Even if you told them last year and you have no idea, you have no reason to believe this person may be struggling or having trouble, recognizing the fact that I know you served and I appreciate it. All right, is sometimes enough to get that person to the next day. All right, I just have a couple of comments to close and then we're done. I want to say something. Okay, I don't do a lot of research. I'm a dean now, so I don't even really have to do research anymore. But even when I was a faculty member, research was like my least favorite thing. I'm just not good at it. All right, I'm actually okay at teaching, but I'm not very good at research. But the research that we've done with a couple of people actually in this room since I've been here are centered around something called grit. All right. Now, there's a lot of problems with this whole idea of grit in that it's, for one thing, it's very generational. So if you studied people from 30 years ago, you're probably not going to find the same thing as you do with 18-year-olds now, right? I mean, people are very different generationally. So there's different issues. But there's two parts to grit, and it has to do with passion and persistence. I'm here to tell you folks, in my experience, passion gets you started, but it will never keep you going. Never. I want to be an artist. I want to work with people. I want to do this. I want to be outside. Yeah, until the first time it snows. All right. Nothing on this side of heaven is the panacea. All right. So don't think there's downsides and upsides to everything. The part of grit that really matters is persistence. Teaching yourself the discipline part of never quitting. All right? Just putting your head down, close your eyes if you have to, shut your mouth, do good, and move forward. If you can do that, you can conquer anything. Everybody in this room, military or veteran, not veteran, has had to do things in their life that they did not enjoy. Right? You've also not did things you were supposed to do because you didn't want to do them. In which scenario afterwards did you feel better about yourself? There's so many simple lessons that I learned in the military that it's really easy to forget in the civilian world. If you get up and you do PT in the morning, you will feel better. Holy crap. Isn't that amazing? Just go out, sweat, tear your muscles, and then, it's about this time of day, you're like, yeah, I feel all right. As opposed to, I should have worked out this morning. All right. There's some simple things. Eat right. Get enough sleep. Contact the people in your life. Make believe everybody that you know is going to die tomorrow. And quit being a jerk. If that person's going to die tomorrow, you probably want to be a little nicer to them. So if you just treated everybody like you were never going to see them again, and I shouldn't say you, me too, all right, it would be a better world. It would be a much better world. All right, no matter what your belief is about what happens to you when you leave this earth, I think most of us in this room believe we don't stay on this earth anyway. There's either nothing or something after this. But this is not it, all right? So to act like this is the end all is nuts. It's absolutely nuts. We're living for something bigger. That's what the military is about. You're living for something bigger than yourself. And when that was taken away from me when I retired voluntarily, it left a huge hole. It left a huge hole. And I needed to find what that new mission was. Finding that new mission is really important. If you're getting up every morning and just going through the motions, and if you're a vet, you're in trouble. You're going in a direction that's going to lead you to trouble. Your next mission, it could be a degree, it could be a job, it could be a family, it could be whatever your next mission is. But know what that next mission is and work toward that. Because when we had a next mission, we knew what we had to get ready for, right? So you knew how to prepare. But if you're just floundering through life and you don't know what the next mission is, how do you know what to prepare for? Identify your next mission and then move toward it. You know, you can just take the shoot part out. Move, shoot, communicate. You know, just take the shoot part out. So grit. In our, I don't know, Corey, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of looking at grit, that's my takeaway from grit. But I kind of, in all honesty, I knew that already being in the military. Passion didn't get you through an obstacle course. Persistence did. Not being willing to give up. All right. I've talked a lot around ethics and discipline. Let me just give you a definition of discipline that I really like. Discipline is doing the right thing in the absence of supervision. So if my mother is standing there telling me to do something, or my boss or whoever, and I do it, that's not discipline. That's just following orders. All right. But if I know if I don't do that, they're going to tell me to do it and I do it on my own, that's discipline. Or if I know I'm going to feel better because I get up and I work out rather than sleeping for that extra hour, that's discipline. And I know if I get ahead on my work because I know I'm going to be busy next week, that's discipline. All right. So all those things that you do without somebody having to tell you to do them, that's discipline. The more you can live your life without people having to tell you to do something, the more disciplined you are. That's a pretty lofty goal for me, is to be able to get through the day by doing what I know is right. You know, there's also this thing called cognitive dissonance. I'll get all psyche on you. And when you live a way that's different from your value system, it really messes with your head. That's what I'm talking about, you know, when I worked at that Lockheed company. It messes with your head. I know I should be like this, but I'm being like this. That's called cognitive dissonance. It doesn't go away until you either change your value system or change your behavior. And that's why you want to drink on top of it. And that's why you want to go have crazy sex on top of it, so that you can forget about it. You don't want to deal with that dissonance. All right? If you're feeling that dissonance, you're not doing something you know you should be doing. So do it. Start. And the dissonance goes away. It's amazing. All right. There's so many simple lessons that came out of the military for me. All right. Lastly, I think we have some responsibilities in freedom. We've talked some of them. We need to make sure that our kids know where we came from. We need to make sure that our kids are goal-driven, like I talked about, the next mission and all that kind of stuff. We need to make sure our kids are brought up respectful. Somebody was talking about how, you know, it doesn't seem like civics is taught anymore. And I know New Mexico just put civics a couple of years ago back into the K-12 curriculum, so that's a good thing. So kids are now learning again about our country. I remember 5, 6 years ago mentioning something saying, well, they don't have 3 branches of government like we do. And looking in the classroom and everybody looking at me like, please don't ask me, please don't ask me. I'm like, I know that look. Anybody, what are the 3 branches of government? Not a single person. There are 30 kids in the room, not one of them could answer. All right. So we have this responsibility. If the school's not going to do it, then doggone it, we should be doing it. All right. As vets, as parents, as neighbors, as aunts, uncles, big brothers, sisters, whatever. All right. These kids need this. All right. You know, I had a 5x8 card that had about 7 or 8 jokes. It's in my office. So I have no jokes. Does anybody have any questions of me? Oh, what? My wife has a question. Huh? What happened in 2001? Fort Sam, San Antonio. And then I retired in 2002. Why? Is that what you meant? Oh. Oh, yeah. I was actually, yeah, 9/11 wasn't that significant to me. Yeah. I was actually on leave in Wisconsin during 9/11. I already had retirement orders. You know, I was on leave. I called, there's no flights. How are you going to get back from Wisconsin to San Antonio at that point? So I played golf on September 12th and figured out a flight to get back and everything. And then they sent me to Afghanistan anyway, but different story. All right. Other questions or comments? I'm getting the hook. Thank you. I thought it was unreasonable for you to have to listen to me talk for so long, but I did 50 minutes and nobody's sleeping, so yay. Thank you.
Awesome speech by Dr. Bob Schneider. Thank you for your time, for giving us all a valuable speech. Awesome. For all the staff and faculty, we have these QR codes. If you could just please scan it and fill in the information in it so we can identify our veteran staff and faculty. Right now, about like 1 p.m., we will be commencing our SVO meeting, as I emailed everybody. And we'll just be talking about roles, and you get to meet all the members of the veteran office. So again, thank you for everyone for coming out today. Hope you enjoyed your meal, and happy Veterans Day.